Okay, thank you for your patience. This morning I invite everyone to come together in a sense of adventure, a sense of a new beginning, a sense of taking that first step in a journey of discovery, of excitement, of love, of joy, of bliss. There is only one life, and it is magnificent. It is more than the human mind, intellect, logic, reason can comprehend. And we are part of it. And it has created us out of itself to discover, to explore. Dr. Holmes called us spiritual explorers in the unexplored territory of mind. Divine love has created us out of itself and left us alone to make the discovery. And as Meister Eckhart tells us, as a child clears its throat playing hide and seek to be sure it will be found, the divine is constantly revealing itself to us if we would just pay attention. But God speaks to us in the language of the heart. And if we only pay attention with the senses, we will miss it. So today we open our hearts. We allow our consciousness, which is part of divine consciousness, to move to that place beyond logic and reason, or before logic and reason, is probably a better way to put it. Rumi called it the field beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing. In the East they call it undifferentiated perception, being, isness, suchness. In the Old Testament, it is the I amness that Moses experienced in the fire that burns but doesn't consume. Let's invite ourselves to be there now, to hear these words, but to let the concepts work through our heart. For divine love is calling us to itself. And this time that we spend together is simply a step on that journey. We are committed to that journey. For in truth, there is nothing else worth having. We are committed to the growth of our soul, to the experience of the divine presence, to unconditional love. We are grateful for this opportunity to be together, to love one another, to inspire one another, to learn from one another, to appreciate each other, to look into each other's eyes and feel the presence of God looking back at us. We know that whatever we need to hear today, we hear. Whatever needs to be said today is said. Whatever we need to feel today, we feel. And whatever we need to inspire us today reveals itself to us this day. We release this treatment to the perfect law that is part of the unified whole, and which knows exactly what to do to produce the change or changes as needs must be in our consciousness for a deeper experience of the conscious realization of the activity and the presence of God in us, as us, around us, and through us. We release this treatment to that perfect law, knowing so certainly it is done, that we say together, and so it is. Well, Lori and I would like to wish everyone a happy New Year. We hope you had a good, safe, and joyful celebration. You know, and we have to kind of consider that, you know, this concept of the year starting on January 1st is sort of arbitrary. You know, other cultures have their New Year's starting at different times. Other calendars run by the moon instead of the sun and those things. But the ideas behind it are the same. We're starting over again. We're starting over again. We're beginning anew. Now, there's a difference, of course, between just repeating something over and over again and kind of growing in the course of that year. The old adage you would see, it says, you know, if you're on the job, do you have 20 years experience or do you have 1 year's experience 20 times? You know, did you just go through the motions and do the same thing over and over again? Or are you constantly growing as you go through the year? So the analogy that works well for me, because I used to fly sailplanes, is the concept of the sailplane, which is spiraling up in a thermal. Now, you know that the sun heats the earth, but heats it unevenly depending upon what's there. You know, water heats at a different rate than land. Plowed land, brown fields, they'll heat up quicker than green fields with crops growing in them and those kind of things. And glider pilots learn that. You learn where the ground is going to be warmer, and therefore there's a column of air that starts to rise up over it. Warm air rises. And if you go out on a beautiful day with the cumulus clouds, the little white puffy cotton ball clouds, where they're all over the sky, each one of those marks the top of a column of rising air. What happens is, as the air rises, it cools. The atmosphere cools. It's 2 degrees centigrade every 1,000 feet. So there's not going to be a test on that. But at some point, the air gets to the altitude where it reaches the condensation point, and the moisture that's in the air kind of drops out and forms the cloud. So we learned to look for that when we were flying. We learned to look for those clouds. Can we get underneath them and circle around? So what you would do is you would fly towards it, and when you get into the lift, you would actually feel it. And it's flying by the seat of your pants. You would actually feel it. If you've been on a commercial plane, you kind of hit, you know, speed bumps, air pockets, whatever you want to call them. You know, it kind of changes in the air. And you would feel it. And there was a little instrument in the cockpit that would peg up and would tell you that now the plane is going up. Even though your nose might be level on the horizon, you're rising up. The plane is rising up. So we bank it over into a tight circle, and you keep adjusting that circle so that the whole time that you're in the turn, you're staying in that lift. You know, you're not flying out of it and then coming back into it. And once you get centered in that lift, you just stay that way. You just stay that way for as long as you can. Now, for somebody on the ground looking straight up, it would appear that the plane was just going in circles, just turning in circles, and getting a little bit smaller every time it does. from somebody directly above looking down, it would look like the plane was going in circles, but getting a little bit bigger every time it goes around. But if you look at it from the side, you can see that what's happening is that the plane is in a spiral. It's spiraling up. So it is not only turning in a circle, but it is always constantly going up. So if you look at it from the side, you know, it's kind of like a twirl. It's kind of like twirling up and twirling up and twirling up. To me, that's the perfect visual for what we're talking about in terms of we start over. We start to turn again. But we're not repeating necessarily. We're hopefully not repeating the same things over and over and over again. We are coming to them at a different level, perhaps, but we are constantly rising. One year out at the conference at the Asilomar Campgrounds in California, Dr. Carlton Whitehead gave a talk, and he had been a minister for about 50 years at the time. Very well known, published several books. And he was talking about, he had attended a workshop that another minister had delivered the day before on slaying your dragons. And Dr. Whitehead mentioned that in his talk, that he had attended this workshop and he had gotten so much out of it. So after his talk, you know, he was kind of greeting people. They would come up and say hi to him and things as the crowd was dispersing, getting ready to go to the next event. And a lady came up to him and said, "Oh, Dr. Whitehead, you've been a minister for 50 years now. Certainly you have no more dragons to slay." And he just chuckled and he says, "What planet are you from?" You know, he says, "Hopefully," he says, "I'm not slaying the same ones I was slaying last year." He says, "But there's always an opportunity to grow. There's always an opportunity to kind of move through something." And that was what the idea of slaying the dragons is. You know, take these opportunities to grow and grow through them. So I hope I've given you an idea of what we're talking about, because we're beginning the year again. We're beginning again. We always begin with the first 4 chapters of the Introduction to the Science of Mind textbook. And I'm going to show you, I hope you can see this. This is my copy of my first copy of the Science of Mind textbook. And you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but it's coming apart at the spine. It's kind of falling to pieces. And I've got other copies, but this is my first one. And I got it when we were living in Denver in the late 80s, and I was attending the Mile High Church of Religious Science out in, I think it's in Lakewood, Colorado. And that was the first religious science church I ever went to. And that's where I got that book. And I've had it ever since. And every year, we start with the first 4 chapters to the introduction of the textbook. So we're spiraling around, we're beginning again, but it's never the same, you see, it's never the same. I open that up, I read that, I know I've read it at least 30 times. It's been almost 30 years or more than 30 years since I got the book, somewhere between 87 and 91. I've read it many times in between the beginning of the year. And every time I open that up, and every time I read it, there's something different. There's something different that reaches out to me and kind of pokes me and says, "Here, think about this. Have you ever thought about this before?" Life is always calling us forward. Always calling us forward. Right? It's kind of the inevitableness of God. We are here to grow in our understanding and our experience of divine love. That's why we're here. And if we don't do that, if we try to stay in the same place, you know, sometimes human beings don't like change, and we try to create this illusion that nothing's going to change, everything's going to stay the same, you know. No matter how hard we try to stay put, life is going to push us and pull us and prod us forward. And I think when I open that book every year, at least once a year, when I open that book and read the first 4 chapters, that's what's happening to me, is that life is saying, "Here, look at this. Are you ready to grow with this year? Are you ready to move forward with this concept this year? Are you ready to explore? See, this is why in the opening treatment I said, can we think of ourselves as explorers on an adventure? I was going over the steps in Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey. If you look online, I think there's 12 steps to the hero's journey. And of course that is a metaphor for life, for all of our lives. Not just for storytelling, not just for mythology, not just for Hollywood. You'd be surprised the plots in Hollywood that just follow that tried and true hero's journey. The first Star Wars movie, for example. But it starts out with everything is just ordinary, right? And the movies will start this way. When you watch a movie, it usually starts out, and for the first 5 or 10 minutes, it is showing us what the ordinary world of the protagonist in the story is. This is the world that they're used to. This is how they live. This is their friends. These are their friends. This is their job. This is what's important to them and all that. And then something happens, you see. Something happens. And Campbell calls it the call to the adventure. The call to the adventure. In screenwriting, it's the first plot point. Something happens that yanks that person out of the ordinary world and tells them that it's time to go on this adventure. And then there's following stages like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's just a rejection of the call. I don't want to do it. I'm not going to go. But eventually, the hero goes. You see, and this is each and every one of us. Each and every one of us. We get so used to our ordinary life. We get up in the morning, we go to work. We come home. We do the chores. We help the kids with the homework. We do all the different things that are the normal, natural parts of ordinary life. And yet there is that within us. There is that within us which is calling us to the adventure. Calling us to the adventure. And the adventure I am talking about is not going out into the world as the Hollywood would have. The ordinary person goes out into the world and suddenly is caught up in doing battle with all of these bad guys and evil forces and all these things. The adventure is an adventure of discovering the self with a capital S. Self-discovery or self-realization, as we might get from the Hindus. Self-realization. The S is with a big S. It's not the ego self. It is the divine self. We are trying to recognize and experience the presence of the divine within us. And we have to go on this journey. There's a process that we go through. We have to get started. We have to have some guidance. Right? That's part of the journey. According to Campbell, is meeting the mentor. The mentor is going to explain to the hero what's going to happen and what they need to know and what they need to do along the way. So I invite you this January to think of this day, this Sunday, this first Sunday of January that we're spending together, as each of us kind of feeling that call and answering that call. Not that we've never answered it before, not that we haven't been serious before in our life, but in a deeper level of commitment, a deeper level of our intention to grow. Everything starts with intention. It has to start with the intention. And we have the adage from the East that says, don't bother looking for God unless you would do so as earnestly as you would look for a pond if your hair is on fire. Is your intention this year to go forward and to seek and find the divine within as earnestly as you would seek and find a pond if your hair was on fire? We are on a glorious journey together. We are stepping forth. Now, interesting. Then I'm going to flip back to the to the sailplanes for a little bit, which is they don't have an engine, so they can't take off on their own. They need assistance. They need something to get them started. And there's many different ways that that they can be launched into the air. But one of the most popular, of course, is just simply flying behind a tow plane, which is the way that I learned. So you have this short piece of rope. It's 200 feet long. It's connected to a tow plane, which is usually some form of a crop duster. And it's hooked, it's hooked to the front of your plane. And when it's time to go, when everybody's ready and everything's clear, you kind of wiggle your rudder, which says, I'm ready to go. And the tow pilot starts and takes you off. And so the first time you're learning how to fly, you're in tight formation 200 feet behind another plane. It's kind of cool. Tow plane can get you assisted. The tow plane can get you up. Tow plane can even perhaps take you towards one of those clouds. But at some point you've got to let go. At some point you have to release the tow rope. Excuse me, I'm going to get a sip of tea here from my throat. So at some point you have to decide, well, now from now on I'm going to do what I can do. I'm not going to rely on the power of the tow plane or the choices that the tow pilot is making as far as which way to go. I'm going to pull that release lever and I'm going to go out on my own. I'm going to explore on my own. So I think that the talks that we have on a Sunday, the classes that we have during the week, the mastermind groups on Monday nights, all of these things are kind of the equivalent of the tow plane. They are mechanisms to get us started. But at some point, if we are truly to become the pilots of our own soul, if you think of it that way, we have to take action on our own. We have to begin on our own. So we have education, we have study, we have books to read, we have talks to listen to, we have people to coach us and to help us. We have all of these kind of things which serve to get us started. And then we have our spiritual practice. We have to have practice. If we don't have practice, really the rest is just entertainment. It's nice to listen to a good talk. It's nice to listen to good music on a Sunday. It's nice to feel good about life and to have a positive outlook on life. But the real growth starts with practice. William James, in his book on Man and His Religions, he said that there's a conversion experience that people go through, and it doesn't matter whether they're what he called the pessimist or the optimist. So, for example, pessimists might start off and think that life is bad, but the good news is that we have been saved, and that's the conversion experience. And I'm not making fun of it. It's a very important and valid experience. But it's suddenly saying, well, but life doesn't have to be that way. There's something better, and I'm now part of that something better. The optimist might say, well, life is good, life is really not that bad, life is good, but it can be even better because I am part of it, and I can have an even better experience. And at these 2 points, you think that the two different worldviews would come together, and they don't. And James says that what happens is, if you look at people at that point, nothing much changes in their lives. Their behavior doesn't change very much. They're still very much the same people as they were before the conversion experience. But they feel better about themselves. They feel better. So the shift was a shift in attitude, but not yet a shift in behavior. They haven't really begun to practice yet. So you have to have the realization of the call to adventure. You have to have that awakening. You have to have that conversion experience. But then nothing much is going to happen until the practice kicks in. We have to pull the release, let go of the tow rope, bank off to the right, and go out on our own and look for lift on our own. And then we can take the things that we have learned in our classes and listening to Sunday talks, and we can begin to put them into practice. The Wednesday night group is just finishing up Eric Fromm's The Art of Loving, and it's the last chapter, and he's talking about putting into practice the art of love. Excuse me. And he says, as in any other art, you've got theory, you've read all this, you've got this theory, you know all these different things, but until you sit down and practice, until you pick up that paintbrush, you dip it in some paint, start putting something on the canvas, until you actually get into practice, you don't know. You don't know. And he says it takes a couple of things. He says, first of all, it takes concentration. We have to spend time with it. We have to want to do it. I would say it starts with intention. We have to have the intention to do it, because if we don't have the intention, we're never going to get started. We have to have discipline. We have to do it. We have to actually do it. We have to concentrate and give our attention to it while we were doing it, and we must practice. We must practice. And to do that, he says, it requires faith and courage. We have to have the characteristics of faith and courage to do that. So you might say the same thing about our spiritual growth, because actually I think the art of loving and the art of spiritual growth are very much the same, because we're trying to experience love. And what is the experience of the presence of God? It's love. So we can come at it from the art of loving. We can come at it from a spiritual practice of treatment and meditation. We can come at it many different ways, but we're all going the same place, right? So there's many different roads that lead up to the mountain, but eventually we all get to the top. We all get to the top. So as we come together then, what I'm inviting everyone to consider is, do we have the intention this year? Do we have the intention to practice? Study more, certainly. Listen to different speakers, different talks. Listen to different ideas that kind of stimulate us. Read the book and see that sentence that just kind of leaps out at you and says, aha, pay attention here. But then we must be willing to practice. So assuming that we are, then we say, well, where do we begin? Where do I begin? Where's a good place to start? And always a good place to start is the beginning. And we should always start with the end in mind. Covey taught us that in 7 Habits. Start with the end in mind. And we just discussed the end through the month of December. The end is the mystical union. The end is living in the conscious realization of the experience and the activity of the presence of God. That's the end. That's what we're moving to. If you look at the way that the Bible that we use in this country is laid out, the very last book is the book of Revelation. It is the book of living in that mystical experience. It starts out with the book of Genesis, in which human beings have a belief in separation from God. And it ends with the dissolution of that belief in separation. But the dissolution is in the form of a revelation. A revelation. And that's so important to think about that. Revelation, not logic, not reason, not a mathematical formula that we solve, not something that we could read in a book and study, but boom, some type of a change, some type of an awareness, an experience that just comes from within, without process. So what I mean by that is if I needed to solve a mathematical problem. I'm going to buy fertilizer to fertilize my front lawn. And I look on the internet and it tells me that I need 1 bag for every 5,000 square feet of lawn. Now I gotta know how many square feet my lawn is, you know. So I have to figure out what is the formula for determining the area of a lawn. I realize, well, it depends on the shape of the lawn. Is my lawn a rectangle? Is my lawn a square? Is my lawn a circle, or is my lawn a square that has triangles attached to it? All these different things, but there's a process that I can go through to figure that all out. And once I've figured it out, and once I've made my measurements, I can apply my formulas to it. And anyone who applies the formula is going to get the same answer, the same result. That's arriving at something by process. And a revelation would be if I could somehow stand on my front porch and look out at the lawn and say, oh, yeah, that's 12,500 square feet. Just a knowing. It's just something there. You may laugh, it may sound funny to you, but this happened to me. I worked in California for a couple of years, and there was a business park. Our office was in a business park with many other companies. But there was a restaurant, one kind of place where you go make sandwiches, carry out your sandwiches. And people from all different companies would come there, and you go through and you build your sandwich at the sandwich bar, and you go up and you weigh it, and then you pay and you leave. Excuse me. And they had a sign there, and it said, if you can guess the exact weight of your sandwich, it's free. So one day I'm standing there, and the man in front of me hands the sandwich to the cashier, and he tells her what it weighs. Because everybody guesses, right? I mean, you might actually get it right one day. So he tells her what it is, she puts it on the scale, she says to him, yep, you got it again. She hands him the sandwich and he leaves. Excuse me. So I was next, and I gave her my weight, and of course I was off by about 30 pounds, I think. And I said, that guy just got it right? She said, yeah. I said, that's amazing. She says, I'll tell you something more amazing. She says, he gets it right every day. Every single day he gets it right. I said, well, does he make the same sandwich every day? The engineer in me is thinking, well, if you use 2 pieces of bread that are about the same size and put 2 pieces of cheese and 4 pieces of cold cuts, it's going to weigh about the same. She said, no, he makes something different every day. But every day, he knows exactly what that weighs. And I said, I wonder how he does that. And she says, I asked him. And he said, I haven't a clue. It's just there. He holds the sandwich, he knows what it weighs, and he gets it for free every day. That's more of a revelation I'm talking about, more of an inspiration. There's no explaining it. It just is. It happened. It's there. I saw it. It just is. So what we want to do is we want to begin in earnest again, in earnest, our dedication to our discovery of the presence of the divine within us. And we want to put into practice that which we can practice. We can begin our meditation, we can begin our spiritual mind treatment, we can read a chapter in the book, or there's little books, 365 Days of Science of Mind, which has a little positive thought and a treatment for the day, and we can get that and start a day with that, and do what we can to earnestly move ourselves up a little bit further this year. So the place we have to begin, in the beginning of the textbook, and just briefly, the first 4 chapters of the textbook of the Science of Mind are Ernest Holmes reiterating or restating the content of Thomas Troar's The Creative Process in the Individual. And that is available in PDF format on the web. So some people felt that Troard was a little bit hard to understand, and Dr. Holmes wanted to make it clear, wanted to clarify a little bit. Excuse me. As a side note, Emmett Fox was the advance man for Thomas Troard, and Emmett Fox made it his goal to clarify what Thomas Troard was saying. Troard was a British judge in India, and he wrote in very difficult language for us at this time to understand. Everything was presented in the form of a logical argument. There was a major premise, there was a minor premise, there was a conclusion. And a lot of his works were transcribed from talks that he gave. So, sometimes a sentence takes up 3 or 4 pages with just colons and semicolons and commas and things like that. But at any rate, the idea of the creative process in the individual is there is this thing called God. And this thing called God creates. And there is a process by which it creates. And we are part of that process. That process is in us as the individual. Same process, not a different process, the same process. And we, in using, for lack of a better term, I say use, we in using that process, we are creating the conditions of our lives. Whether we know it or not, whether we are consciously cooperating or whether we are unconsciously or subliminally, is probably a better way to put it, cooperating. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. There's this thing that we call God, and I'll explain in a second why we call it, why he starts off with the thing itself. But there's this thing called God. There's this thing. Doesn't matter what we call it. It is. And by its very nature, it is creative. And there's a process by which it creates, the creative process. And that creative process exists in us, as us, and through us because we are its creation. We are part of it. And we are constantly creating the conditions in our own lives by action of this process or this law of mind. And that law interacting with our beliefs. Not our wishes, not our good thoughts, not our hopes, not our desires, but our beliefs. It is done unto you according to your belief. That's what the New Testament says. As you think and believe in your heart, so are you. That's what the Old Testament says. Everything you have ever experienced is a result of what you have thought. That's what the Buddha teaches. And there's 2 aspects of that. One is by thought we're creating, and the other is by thought we are experiencing through our thoughts. And then the Stoic philosophers that made popular by Napoleon Hill, their quote was, whatever the mind can conceive and believe, the mind can achieve. That's what these 4 chapters are about. That's what we're going into for this month of January. And we have to begin, Dr. Holmes starts us with the idea of the thing itself. And the reason for that is, if we use the word God, everybody's got this concept, this pre-programmed concept of what that means. And everybody has a different pre-programmed concept of what that means, what God is, and how God works. And if we are to advance in terms of spiraling upward, if we are to have a different experience, we need to be willing to explore our own ideas and challenge our own ideas. And for those on the bridge, I apologize. I have to sip some tea and honey here to keep my throat calm. people on YouTube can see what I'm doing, but the people on the bridge can't. So I invite you to consider then that what our spiritual growth is we are constantly expanding our intellectual understanding, but most importantly our experience of what this thing is. So the reason that I believe Dr. Holmes calls it the thing is to give us that opportunity of letting go of all preconceived notions and being willing to start all over again and being willing to expand what we already know. One of the things that I learned when I was working in change management is that we human beings, this is a model that I use to kind of describe the world as I saw it, excuse me, is that we human beings, we form mental maps or paradigms. Joel Barker would call them paradigms. We have an experience and we assign meanings to that experience, and we think then that this is what that means and this is the way it ought to be from now on. And when something changes, something happens that doesn't fit our preconceived paradigm, it causes cognitive dissonance for us. This is a problem. And our first instinct might be, well, something's wrong. Not me, I'm not wrong, but something's wrong out there. They did something wrong. They changed something wrong, whoever they happen to be. So one of the examples I would use is if you grew up in a town and you went to high school in that town and you drove to school every day in that town and you knew exactly where your house was and you knew exactly what roads went from your house to school and you knew where the grocery store was and so on and so on. You've created a mental map. Now, of course, this is in the days before GPS on your phone. You've created a mental map. You know where things are. So now you're going back to your 50th high school reunion and you fly into the airport because you're living in a different town. You have for many, many years. And you go to the rental car counter to get your car. And the clerk says, they pull out a map and they say, would you like directions to where you're going? And you say, oh, no. Are you kidding me? I grew up here. I know every back road. I know every place to turn. I know everything there is about this town. And you get in the car and you start to drive from the airport back to where you used to live because you want to look at the old neighborhood. And you find out you can't find it anymore. The roads are all different. They got roads where there were never roads before. Where the old roads were, they're not there anymore. Maybe they've been renamed or maybe they've been torn out and new roads put in. Where the drive-in used to be is a big housing development, and on and on and on. And what has happened is things have changed, but our mental map has not. And there's a problem, So the first thing, we might do is say, well, there's something wrong here. But eventually we have to come to the realization that what is wrong is our map. Our concept of the world needs to be updated because it no longer fits what's going on. And in that example, I would ask people now, would you be angry with yourself if that happened? Would you say, no, my mental map is the right map and everything else is wrong and we need to go find a way to have them put everything back the way it ought to be? Would we struggle with it? Would we feel bad about ourselves for some reason? Would we desperately try to hold on to the past is what I'm getting to. And of course we wouldn't. We would say, well, no, all I need is a new map, really. And thank goodness I took the one that the clerk at the rental car counter gave me. It's in the glove box and I can pull it out. Now I can find my way. Excuse me again. Our growth, Our spiritual growth is about our willingness to let go of our old paradigms, to let go of our old mental maps about what God is, how God works, who we are, what our relationship to God is, and all of those ideas. We have to be willing to do that. If the God we believe in today is the same God we believed in when we were 5 years old, we haven't changed very much. So every year we should be able to say, where was I a year ago? A year ago this time, where was I in my belief, in my understanding of what this thing is? Where was I? And has that changed at all? Has my understanding of who I am in relationship to it, has that changed at all? And most importantly, kind of going back to what William James said, has my experience changed? Not just my attitude, not just my feeling, not just life is good. I woke up this morning listening to Ray Stevens, Everything is Beautiful is playing in my head. I don't need a clock radio because the music plays in my head. And Ray Stevens, everything is beautiful. Everything is beautiful in its own way. And it's a delightful song. And that's an attitude towards life. But is our experience of life beautiful? Are we applying ourselves to our practice? Have we had the conversion experience, but not yet had the follow-on experiences? So what we're going to do for the next few weeks is we're going to pick up where we left off every week. This is kind of one talk for the month. And it'll go back and forth through the creative process. We'll talk more next week about different concepts of God and why it's so important. And the bottom line of why it's important is whatever your concept of God is going to determine the rest of your life. If you believe in a mean, vindictive, punishing God, that's the kind of life you're going to live. If you believe in a kind and a warm and a loving God, you'll have a totally different kind of life. So next week we are going to pick up with the first chapter in earnest. This week was kind of like a setup for the month. As I say, the chapters flow together, so there's not really very clear lines of distinction between one and the other. But we'll be talking about the creative process. What is this thing? How does this thing work? What is our relationship to it? What does it mean to our life? So what I invite you to do this week is go to the internet, look for Thomas Troar's book, The Creative Process in the Individual, download the PDF, and do the best you can with reading it. Just get started reading it. Also, open your Science of Mind textbook, which I hope everybody has. But open your Science of Mind textbook and read the introduction, the first chapter of the introduction, which is called The Thing Itself. Then I invite you to just be still somewhere and explore your concept of God. What do I really believe about God? How does my life reflect that belief? Do I live my life in a manner that reflects that belief, or do I really believe something else and I'm just telling myself I believe a different way? Let's really, really take that step this year. Let's really get into it this year, more so perhaps than we have ever done together before. Let's really begin that journey. Let's answer the call to adventure. The magnificence of the universe is within us, and it is calling us home. It is saying, here I am. Love me. Learn about me. Be with me. Let's make this the year that we do so more earnestly than ever before. And we will pick this up next week. And so it is.